Welcome back to a new episode of Ask Mom
and Dad.
There, see, we did it right this time.
Yeah, well, it helps because if it was Ask Dad and Mom, I should do most of the talking on the front end.
At least
Not that I don't do most of the talking, as some might say, in this relationship. Don't let them fool you. They say men only have so many words. Well, it depends on the man.
Definitely
Real
true.
men talk too
Have they
much.
met any of the men in my home? But anyway, never mind.
Well, there's at least one that's kind of no. They all talk once you let them loose.
Oh, yeah.
That's true.
Get them on the right subject matter, at least. They'll at least repeat themselves over and over again.
Yeah, well, welcome to another episode of Ask Mom and Dad. I'm still Dad and Greg, and this is Tonya in front of me here. And I don't know why I'm reintroducing everything, except for I'm trying to transition.
It feels weird.
It feels weird.
I introduced it.
No, well, maybe, I don't know. I think so for those of you who weren't here a few minutes ago before we turned on the recorder, Tonya and I oftentimes have these conversations, and we're like in the middle of them going, we should be recording this, which makes perfect sense. We probably
I think it's just mostly because we talk a lot. If we record a little bit of it, something might actually make sense.
Yeah.
So when we're making sense or when we're having good dialogue, we think, "Ooh, we probably should be recording it at least."
It does seem to make sense that we would do that, doesn't it? I don't know why. I don't remember to turn on the recorder more often. But anyway, I'm gonna stop now.
Because we also just talk. We don't record everything we say.
Well, like most
people.
relationships, we have conversations.
Well, actually, I was told that's not necessarily true. I guess it depends. You and I are both talkers, for one thing. But, I would say that's probably what's kept our marriage together. When we have decent, long conversations, we kind of like it. So that's good.
Kind of like it, like long conversements, argusations. It depends. You're right. I mean, and I say that only because there's what some people might refer to as arguing is sometimes what you and I are working through something. That's what an argument should be.
I don't know.
That's
And
what
both of us are weird. We kind of enjoy that. So that's freaky.
That may just sound very sadistic. We like to.
Well, we don't like the argument part. But usually it means that we're trying to get to a mutual understanding of what we're even trying to say.
And at least one of our children acknowledge that that's why they're somewhat healthy, even though we question whether or not that child is healthy sometimes.
Well, and sometimes we are trying to say the same things. Sometimes we have two sides to the same thing, and we don't understand it or see it until we've worked through it and realize what we're saying. So all that is challenge.
and
that's the whole seeing the other side of the cup.
That we said that just for the sake of those who haven't been along for the ride. Early in our marriage, we learned the idea of perspective from the idea of a coffee cup.
No, we didn't learn it. We just talk about it. I don't think we ever really learned it.
In the midst of a disagreement, we don't remember it.
Right.
That's true.
Well, I gave the illustration to someone the other day because it's what marriage really is. And so the idea that you're going after is you're holding a cup, you've got the handle on one side, and if you've got it in your hand, like I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold it in the right hand, and I'm going to convince you beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is on the right side. If I'm holding it right in front of you, however, you're going to convince me that it is completely on the left side, and there's no way it could be on the right side.
Yes.
And for me, there's no way it could be on the left side. I was telling this friend of mine, that's what marriage is. Because you really are looking at the same cup, the exact same, probably even seeing it the same. However, from two different complete perspectives, it's going to sound right the opposite, which
it's funny
is
because
bizarre.
As you're saying that illustration, first off, we learned the information. We're learning to live the information.
Trying to be okay with it, yeah.
Are we 35 years? How many years are we married? Not quite.
Yep, 35.
Yeah. Oh, geez, this year was 35. Man, what the heck were we doing the last 35 years? Oh, we were
lots going on.
Yeah, that's why we're having these conversations, isn't it? Because we had lots going on. Anyway, the point of it is we had the tools, but like any tool, you're better at it over time as you learn it. And
well, even if you know a thing, doesn't mean you apply it real well.
So the example that I want to think of is you and I both have done a little bit of acting in our earlier years, but I still to this day get confused with stage right and stage left.
Yeah.
Is it stage right from the director's point of view, or is it stage right? Is it
from when you're looking from the audience?
If you're on the director's on
pretty
the,
sure.
The director's in the audience usually.
Oh, okay.
So is the actor stage left or stage right, or is it the director? If the director says come down stage left, from the director's vision, does everybody move to the right?
I'm pretty sure it's from the perspective of the audience.
See, now I got to Google it.
And so we had to learn it. It might be the other way, yeah. I
See,
can't remember
the
now.
thing
It's
is
been a while.
we've both acted.
Yes, we have.
And
It's
my
been a
son's
while.
probably
Judah
listening
would
to this
know.
right now going, what
He's
are
rolling
you
his
problem people
eyes. I
talking
know.
about? Let's see. Stage left, catering. I don't want a catering service. I want to stage left, on the left side of a stage from the point of view of a performer facing the audience.
Okay, so I was completely wrong.
We were.
You were too.
Which makes no sense whatsoever because the director really knows what's going on. You should be following the
but
director.
it makes complete sense because if you're the actor given instructions from the director, that you'd have to think the opposite all the time. Instead, it's just the one director having to think the opposite.
Right.
And so he can give instructions and all the actors up on stage.
But that diagram looks wrong to you because you're looking. See, I'm showing her a diagram right now that has stage left on the right-hand side of the page and stage right on the left-hand side of the page. It just looks wrong because we're looking at it from the audience's point of view.
And that's what makes more sense to me. I've always said it made more sense that was true. But
up and down stage makes sense to me. I'm even looking at here because that's just farther away is upstage, and from the audience's point of view, farther away is upstage.
Okay, so that's the opposite. Isn't that funny? Because I was thinking the other way around. Yeah,
Somebody
downstage,
just
though,
arbitrarily
as opposed
made
to...
these decisions. And
Yeah, I
it's
know.
Stuck forever. Shakespeare, you did it to us probably. Anyway, the point of the matter is there's differing perspectives saying the same thing.
Right.
And so I just that was an interesting and obviously fun little dialogue about how we can see things differently, but we're still looking at the same things.
And we were talking about trying to discuss marriage and marriage issues. And a lot of times that's exactly, I would say probably 95% of marriage squabbles or misunderstandings are exactly that. You're saying the same things, looking at the same things, but saying it differently.
Yeah.
So that communication gets so confused. And we've talked about how the enemy wants to build those things up to be against each other when it's really not got anything to do with that. It's really not against that person at all. It's just a miscommunication, but it's very frustrating. And it's because you think that person should be thinking like you do. Because you've been married this long, you've been walking together, you think the other person knows you. And yet, in reality still, they are outside your person. There's no way they could actually see and communicate exactly like you do. So it makes sense. It's just really difficult to remember. Plus, we've said in the past too, this wasn't going to be our subject today, but apparently that's where we're talking.
Watch me. I'm going to transition us right into it.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, just keep going.
Well, I was going to say, we also said how personality differences make such a difference. Men versus women in the way they converse about things. But it's also just that two people trying to be one together see it differently. So personalities make a difference in how you communicate and how you deal with life. Again, it'd be great if that person is exactly like you so that they thought exactly like you so that when you communicate, they get what you're saying, but that's just not true.
No, in the case of the way that a pre-fallen civilization. Well, it's kind of funny though when you think about this. If you really go back to the garden, Adam and Eve, they didn't even have good communication before the fall. And it just occurred to me that the serpent in the story is able to isolate Eve and tell her something different than what she understood it. She gave, one might argue, a point of view that was different than what she understood. The question wasn't whether she got the clear communication. The question was whether or not she trusted one voice over another. And so it didn't happen because both were communicating something clearly, but one was the one to follow and the other one wasn't. Anyway, that was a completely wild rabbit.
Well, but help me understand what you're saying. So when God told them, don't do this because this is the barrier, this is the boundary, and this will happen if you do, which we know, don't eat off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil because if you do, you'll die. So he's giving them advice and encouragement to, here you have everything else, just avoid this one thing because I don't want you to die, basically. Or I don't want you to think or to understand what death is. I think that's kind of... Anyway, Satan instead is enticing them to question, and you're said to trust what they were hearing or what they actually did hear. Is that what you're saying?
I think that what I'm getting at is it doesn't matter what was said. At the end of the day, they had to decide who to believe.
Yep.
And so what you believe about what's being said to you determines your next steps.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So what I'm saying is that in the application.
So if I think you're on my team versus if I think you're against me,
what
I
you
might hear
believe about a
differently.
relationship determines how you hear whatever's being said.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be saying the same things and have a different perspective from the cup or from the stage, but nonetheless, the instructions get confused because the receiver of the information doesn't trust the sender of the information.
Yep.
Because what happened was, in that story, is she was challenged. She was caused to question whether she could trust. And she chose to trust the one that gave her something new and exciting. And in this case, and so, or something new,
Isn't
whatever
it
you
interesting?
call it.
Because she actually just trusted the challenge rather than trusting the one who loved her, created her, walked with her daily.
Trusted what was too familiar. I don't know. I think
No, didn't trust, right?
She did. Rather than trusting what was too familiar to her, is what I'm saying. You said she chose the other one.
challenge. Yeah.
So,
Man, that's weird. That's a whole big discussion on how God made us and why He might want us to have our ability to think and dream and craft and create, and yet always trust that He is for us. Those kinds of thought processes on how He created them, because that was allowed, but He really wanted them to trust Him for the best, to come back to Him every time.
And what the result of that was they scattered. The garden was scattered. The relationships were broken. Not just their trust between them and God, but even Adam and Eve didn't trust each other. Yeah. The whole thing was busted up because what happens thereafter is he blames her. Mm-hmm. She blames the serpent. And on from there, you got Cain and Abel, and there's blaming and anger, and there's coveting there. And just the family tree just continues to proliferate a lack of distrust. Relationship is what was broken in the beginning, and relationship continues to be the problem today. And that keeps communities from functioning right. And so what we wanted to talk a little bit about today was community. And what you and I were talking about before we went on air was that people seem to do, oftentimes, the things that bring comfort to them, and which specifically we were talking about in churches, and churches sometimes do the things they've always done without knowing why they are doing them.
What I had said seems to be a theme these days, community, and you hear that in from different angles. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, it's interesting that people know they need community, but what is it that actually describes or defines good community, right? Or community done correctly, the way God would want it to be done. Because He Himself created the church, which would be a community of people who have one purpose, one goal, one worship. And so He was the author, and like you're saying, even of the very first community, which was He and Adam and Eve in the garden. Wow. So there's some purposes to it, but it seems as if it gets skewed out of whack a little bit. I mean, humans are famous for that anyway, but so it's an interesting discussion to me on what would be appropriate in community, right? Because then when Jesus came, He challenged them, okay, you guys are a little too communal. All you're doing is the traditions you've always done. What in the world? Mm-hmm, and you've gotten way off track.
Yeah, and I think what we were getting at in the midst of that is, well, what I was getting at, I lost it. I looked up the word community, and I totally didn't lose everything you were saying, but I'm afraid right now I'm getting ready to repeat everything you were saying. And just flag me if I do. But is that the issue is not so much that community is not just a surface thing. Community is not something that the world defines community as, well, we live in a small town. Everyone knows everyone in a small town, or at least knows something about everyone in a small town. You know each other's names. And the larger the town gets, the harder it is to know everybody's names. But even in a small town, people don't know everyone's heart.
Well, we even have the word for community, which might mean a cul-de-sac of houses.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what a community is. This is exactly what I was getting at. We've redefined these things, or defined them according to what the narratives are these days of what people need, so that even online media becomes a, quote, community.
The Facebook community, the Instagram,
and it's similar to the cul-de-sac
Snapchat,
where nobody really knows anybody, but they can sure throw shade at each other without even knowing.
And that's the thing, is right. So there's in community, it's what you want people to see of you. When you look at the social media platforms, that's literally nothing more than a surface text. It's not what's truly underneath the life of the people they're just painting. I mean, they're sending you pictures of their meal and you're thinking, wow, that's a great restaurant. I want to go there. They're living the life. They get to go to the great restaurant. And there's nothing about that that's any deeper than, oh, wow, they take a picture of their food.
And like we talked about with perspective, you read it or understand it according to your own life, not really according to what truth is, right? That's the trap of it.
Well, and that's the thing. So the other layer of that is that there's something that has meaning or purpose beyond just Satan's lie is we want everything to, Satan wants everyone just to see something that has no purpose, has no meaning. It's a shadow of what is real.
Yeah, but I don't think you heard what I said.
I guess I
From
didn't
your
know.
own perspective, you read into what you see, so you're imagining something from either your hopes, dreams, your lack, your whatever, in what you just read as a very surface, probably a statement, like you're saying, had this for dinner. Could very well be that somebody slaved over a hot meal and brought it to them. Could be that they just got out of the kitchen and put it on their own plate. Could be that they went to a fancy restaurant and paid $500. We don't know all the details of that. We know right now in front of us, we are either hungry and desiring that ourselves.
I got you.
So there's a lot that you read into it that isn't there, like you're saying, because it's actually more shallow and has no meaning behind it according to what we know. Yeah. There is, but we don't know it.
Yeah, I don't know what you are. I know what I think you are. In other words, in what you may put something out there for me to see, and I'm going to read all into that, is what you're saying, and I'm going to bring my own baggage to that.
Yeah, you're going to read it according to what you know, not necessarily according to what their life is.
Yeah. Well, the thing on the other side of that coin is the person on the other side of that assumes by telling you something that they are having the same conversation with you, that they're actually saying that you understand what they are saying. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. In other words, I show you this picture, you think, oh, look at this great meal that I ate at a $500 restaurant, or $500 a restaurant. And the reality is the person who's showing you the picture is going, hey, look at the great meal that and you're going, you're seeing it wrong because
your hopes and dreams and whatever, they all come to perspective, which gives you the wrong perception a lot of times.
Yeah. If I say to you, hey, let's have a steak, you think, I want a steak. We have it different ways we want to have it, but we assume that we want the thing, but there's different ways in which we see that. I'm not really doing a good job of this. I'm falling down quicker than I'm standing up here on it. I'm trying to say sometimes the words mean different things to different people is really what I'm trying to say. So,
okay. So if you're back to words, but we're talking about a whole picture. We were discussing community and how it seems as if things get skewed. And I think mostly because we are coming from different perspectives of our own, and they play a lot more of a part of how I'm perceiving you than you might even hope and think that you're giving to me. Like you said, it has a lot to do with trust. For instance, if I saw, say, my mom put a picture up on the internet or, somewhere of something she was eating, likely I could guess, either if she went out to eat, I could probably guess even the pricing, because I kind of know where her boundaries are and how much she's not gonna be in New York paying $2,500 for a meal. First of all, she doesn't make that much. Second of all, it's not gonna be in New York. Those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And I'm likely she will have made it, or someone made it for her, because that's what she appreciates more than even maybe going out to a fancy restaurant. Now, she might have gone out because someone served her and that was precious to her. But I'm saying I'm gonna know some of those boundaries. I'm not gonna know all of them. Whereas somebody just general on the internet that I don't know at all, or I haven't seen for a long time, I might not know anything about their lives. So I'm still going to put my own boundaries, my own understandings, maybe my dreams, my hopes, maybe even my covetous ideas into whatever they're saying. So this is where community is dangerous. Because if we don't know, then what is that word? We project onto that person or onto that situation things that may not be true at all, right?
Yeah. Well, okay, so everyone comes in. Okay, so this kind of crossed the barrier for community to culture too, and now that the world's so big is getting smaller. When I say culture, I mean you heard of we talk about culture shock. Well, there's an idea in that each little community has its own culture, it has its own way of interacting with one another and communicating and connecting with one another that they trust, and they've built traditions around and things like that. But then you bring in a bunch of people from another culture that looks at this strange entity that's interacting the way it is, and they don't know how the entity that's there doesn't know what to do with the people that are coming, and the people that are coming don't understand the words that's coming from the entity. That's, you know what I'm saying? And so,
well, and this is a good thing. This is why we started this discussion.
Right.
How
I'm getting to
community. I was talking about communities and how the world looks at them, such as a soccer community. They all have soccer and is the focus. They all have it in common. However, each different family may operate it differently. Some can afford all the, oodles and gobs of equipment. Some can't. Some can make it to every practice. Some can't. Maybe some can look down on people who aren't because they are not as faithful. They're not as whatever. Those types of maybe nuances or whatever, those types of dynamics come into every community situation. But like we're talking about, you're still going to bring yourself into it. So when we're talking about a church setting, we talk of traditions, we talk of maybe even comfort zones, familiarities. And when you're coming from different places, different backgrounds, different understandings of even those words.
Of how to do church.
Yeah, or what it mean, what like you just said, what the words even mean. Maybe I've been dealing with all along for several years. I'm trying to lead people in music and worship angles. And you'll have someone state, why don't we just do something familiar? Well, the word familiar to them,
everything you're doing is
I
familiar
could let
to
them
you.
write it all down on a paper, and it might not be familiar at all to me. Yeah, so the word familiar is it's so individual. And so
Right. And that's actually a good definition of culture and community. Culture is that which has become familiar to all of us. That's common. It's a common thing that drives a community together. What is familiar in one culture is not familiar in another culture. One of the things we've moved back down south. When we were in Seattle area, I would stop at this gas station every once in a while and get catfish because they had decently good catfish.
yeah, it was.
Yeah, and I would bring it home for you.
that.
Remember, I'd pick it up in the middle of the night, and I'd bring it home and say, you got to have some of this
So
catfish.
yummy,
And the next morning, it was good, and it was in this just nowhere you'd figure to get catfish.
Well, it was
if
a
you wanna know where you-
convenience store,
it was
wasn't it, or
It
something?
was a 76 gas station. Oh, I'm sorry. It was a 76 gas station. And
So it was weird
yeah.
to even that they would
and
have
it
it
was
at
run
all.
by people I didn't think would ever make catfish. So we'll just leave that at that. But when now we're in the southeast, catfish is at every place we go. It's common.
Just about, yeah,
It's
and it's made
familiar to us.
similarly, and it's, yeah.
And then I think about what my son-in-law Lathan said when he came down for the holidays. He was joking about the fact, he goes, what is it with every restaurant down here? There's always bread before it. I'm thinking,
yeah.
I'm pretty sure every restaurant I ever ate at had bread
Don't you know?
before every meal.
Isn't that normal?
Isn't that normal? And so there's different things that are just normal in one culture that's not normal in another. And so culture shock is when a lot of those things compile on someone and they don't know how to function in the midst of that strangeness. Another thing that's true here is the Southeast is very religious. The Northwest is not. It's very spiritual. But if you want to know if someone's a follower of Jesus or not, you really just start talking to them. And the way they talk sounds nothing like a Christian, But here, everyone sounds like a Christian until they had a few drinks at the bar. And all of a sudden you ask them to come to a Bible study and they go, wow, me and God aren't getting along. I don't even know if I believe it anymore. And I'm going, well, he sure didn't sound like that when he not had a few drinks, And so,
well, and the difference is, like you just said, when we're talking about communities, we're talking about a familiarity with even a speech pattern or a linguistic mode, right? So when you live in the Southeast or the Bible Belt, you're familiar with a lot of terms that are, quote, Christian terms. Now, up in the Northwest, something else we encountered was people used the word Christian, but it had no tie-ins even to church or to Jesus, to Christ, which is where the word comes from. They thought of Christian a lot of times as a good person who tried to follow some rules or who was courteous. Right? We know even our son-in-law's family, that's what they would have called a Christian. Sad thing is, they also had a little bit of a taste of church life, which reinforced to them that they were just the same. So they are also Christian. Now, the sad part of that is I think the South probably has, and the Southeast probably could define it a little better. that it would be Jesus, related to Jesus, maybe related to a church culture that you would call yourself a Christian. But what does it actually mean? Does it mean relationship with Jesus that's on an ongoing basis? Or does it mean I go to church every Sunday, I sit in that pew and I know what the rules are and keep my nose clean? I don't know. So you're right. It's communities, to me, they angle so much of how we think about whatever it might be, and culture even in the areas we live in this country.
Well, and you talk about familiar when people say to you, let's do something familiar. Like we said, it's familiar to you, but it may not be familiar to another person. Mm-hmm. But the thing that you're saying there when do something familiar is they're really saying, let's do something that
I know.
I don't have to think about.
I'm comfortable.
I don't have to worry about. Just it kind of, and I don't. There's anything wrong with that. On the one level, I mean, I can go to. I'm getting older, and I go and hear some old songs, even songs that didn't mean a whole lot to me, because like we talk about gospel music sometimes, and I'll hear. I'm like, why in the world am I choked up about something that's gospel-y, and it just kind of hits me here. Well, it reminds me of a better time. There's an emotion there that I can't quite put words around. Now I don't. It doesn't. That's not a real common for me, but it is a thing. But so there's this nebulous, I can't put words around it, incomprehensible kind of thing that is inside. And I think
that's a comfort zone.
People are looking for just to be comforted.
Yeah.
But the gospel or community, as we understand it, as you and I understand it, is gathering or coming together around reason or purpose. And so there's why do we gather? Why do we commune?
So this is what we thought we really wanted to talk about.
Right.
What makes
only took us 20 minutes to get into it.
That's okay. What makes actual good community versus just community, right?
Right.
Because these days, like I was saying, it feels like that word even is thrown around because people know they need it. But what are they actually saying they need when they say that? Well, some would be obvious. They need communication with other people, right? That's one thing. Or even just interaction, maybe as light as just interaction with other people. Number two, they probably need some something that they have in common with others so that they can kind of live their fullest life. If I want to go hiking, I can't really do it on my own, so I'll find a community of hikers so I can go hiking, that kind of thing. So there's a couple different of those angles. Then there's what we would think of community in a church life. There's a lot more pieces to it. So you just mentioned comfort. And comfort. Oh my gosh.
Well, something fell off the wall, but that's okay. We'll move on to that. What you were saying was?
Comfort zone. Comfort versus comfort zone. Whatever. That brings familiarity and comfort. So one angle on that is what genuinely makes you at peace, right? That's what you were kind of touching on.
I was saying that I think that there's...
Or brings you some sentimentality.
People are yearning
for
comfort. They're yearning to be at peace, and that has its place. I think where we struggle is in our culture is that we understand, and you use community around the hiking or biking or some sort of event type thing. I don't know how to do this, so I'm going to come together with people. Well, like
soccer, you would have to come together with other soccer people to play a game
common
of soccer.
Interest is what I'm looking at.
Common interest.
And so, and then you transition back over to Christianity. It's, I think in faith areas, there's this whole desire just to make it about that one comfort thing.
Right.
And we forget the importance of grow. If I'm going to do it around a sport or hiking, I'm going to grow in that. And so I want to be stretched to be a better athlete,
well, that's
that kind of
exactly where we were going to get at.
Right.
What actually makes good community?
Right.
Well, part of it is that next step, which there are twofold, I think. One is accountability.
Okay. I found this on the web for us to set next.
Just keep going. We'll ignore
because if you join, say, a soccer group, your goal, or if you put your child into it, your goal is to do better, to make a better soccer player, to be excelling at your particular talent or skill, right? Learn a skill even. Number two, so that's accountability. To me, number two is the growth or the challenge. So there's two different parts to that. Accountability keeps you moving forward at all. Challenge says you're going to break some walls down that maybe you wouldn't do on your own. Like, if I'm in a running group, they're gonna challenge me to go a little farther than I might on my own. So there's angles to that I think really are the reason God wants us in community. And not only that, but you're also going to get support and encouragement along that way, or you're praying that's true. I believe that's what he, when he designed the church to be the kingdom of God on this earth, it is to do both, to challenge, to keep in a little bit of a accountability structure, but also to always be encouraging that we're in this battle together, we're growing together, we're learning, falling down, picking back up again, because we have brothers and sisters around us doing the same type of journeys, right? So that's what we were saying. So when we're talking about in a church, and maybe this could be a discussion too on what a good church family is.
Well, this is what
right?
I'm going to say. So what is the purpose of a church community? Let's talk about church community for a little bit. Or that's kind of what we were talking about before, is it a place to just go and function in a way that brings you a sense of comfort? We were talking about some specifics, but without getting into any of that, about how sometimes we're just doing things because the things we're doing remind us of something that was a more comforting time. It doesn't necessarily stretch us. It doesn't ask anything of anyone else or ourselves. It just makes us, it asks very little, but it makes us feel better.
Could even just be habitual. We've just always done this one thing, and we've done it this way, and this is what you're supposed to do.
Right. And a lot of what Jesus did in teaching in his walk was challenge that which had become just kind of the thing that they did. And
they didn't even know why anymore. It sounds like he was kind of saying, so had you thought about it this way? Like
Jesus said, I came to seek and save the lost. Well, that's not in the Sabbath teaching on a regular basis. Go out and find the lost, at least not in the experience there, because the people are like, you're doing what?
Yeah.
And he's like, there's people out here that need attention, people. And churches in general, or oftentimes, are caught becoming a place where people want to go to feel better. But the reality is a good community challenges you to do something beyond, something not only to feel better, but to, and not always to feel better, sometimes to be challenged to say that you're not where you need to be in life. There should be something about that community that gives you, the comfort is I have a safe place, a place where there's room for me to struggle and grow in this life, but also for me to make a difference, to grow, to be more, to be challenged, to be something greater.
An example in our country right now, I was talking about the definition of Christian and thinking it's just a courtesy or if I'm a Christian because I don't mess with my neighbor and I keep to myself and I don't rely on anyone or those kinds of things. I was thinking of Jesus said, you've heard it was said this, but instead have you thought about this? I mean, he gave several illustrations of that kind of thing. It's almost like, yeah, you heard or you thought you were a Christian, but what about over here? How are you going to handle this situation?
Sounds like a good sermon series. You've heard it said. Oh, wait, it was a good sermon.
Yeah, it was. That's what I was going to say. That would be what Jesus did. But the bottom line to what we, as ministry people, I think one of the things that God calls us to, and maybe calls every Christian to it, but definitely to those of us who walk and try to be the instigators or the encouragers to the church, are you thinking about this in light of others? Are you thinking in light, not just even, because we're in a church right now they're really great servants. They serve each other really well. And I'm impressed by that. I'm thankful to watch that happen because it's been a while since we've really been in an interactive group like that seemed to take care of each other very well. But what I think of is the other part of it. We moved here from Washington State. We aren't from Tennessee, and we decided to come here because it was where we thought God wanted, and we're kind of missing our family in the Midwest. Some things about the politics in Washington were challenging. We weren't exactly sure how we should approach them, knowing that we couldn't really come against it at the same time as trying to regroup and figure out what that would mean if we went back, that kind of thing. So we came down here knowing we'd find some familiarity to some church life that we grew up with, some of those pieces. But the thing we're noticing is these have been in those modes of operation so long that they're maybe even kind of stuck in those habits without seeing that the ones coming in around them are going to need that. They're going to need to know about Jesus, number one, or to know that there is another lifestyle, another option. People coming from California maybe definitely don't speak their language and may not have ever even understood what the word church is supposed to be, that it's legitimately a group of people seeking after God and challenging each other to do the same.
Yeah, rolling back to our earlier conversation about words. The word church, define church.
Right.
Now,
well, what we understand ecclesia to mean was the gathering, right? The gathered ones or the... but it was definitely not a building or a tent or a place of meeting,
no, the
right?
place of meeting, that's a German word.
Okay.
And it means a house, meeting house, basically. And so
that word
so
is
what
where
has
we get
happened
church, or is it where we
it's
get...
where we get the word church.
Oh, okay. But
what
originally
so
it
what
was...
do we have in our culture?
Ecclesia or...
Ecclesia, that's correct. And that means a gathered,
and that means gathering,
group.
gathered people.
Gathered around a purpose.
So we've smushed that all together and kind of made it the place you go over here where some people might be, right?
Yeah. What does most cultures think of when they think of church? Well, that's the building over there.
Yeah, exactly.
They actually, the people that are lost and hear the word church are actually properly defining what the church is. It's that building over there. But the ecclesia is the people that meet in the building,
right,
or in the facility, or in the park, or wherever two or more are gathered. So the church,
and that's the kingdom.
But the word church, as we understand it, as Christians, is we're interchangeably using the word culturally. We've exchanged the usage of the word church is also equals ecclesia.
Yeah,
gathered together people. So
which is
most people
mentally confusing. Actually,
exactly, it's mentally confusing. It's where our familiarity has made it difficult for.
That's where we tease Hannah because she'll take off her shoes because it's the church and it's her home and it's familiar and it's where her family is. We used to tease her that was what, but in reality, Hannah also got that because no matter where we were, she was in that comfort zone, and she would get teased about it because she felt so familiar and comfortable with the people of God that even if it was out in the middle of a park, she would probably take her shoes off and feel at ease or whatever. And then you go into a quote holy place or a place where it's been built or set aside for the meeting of God's people. Right. And then she gets criticized because she doesn't look proper or act proper or whatever.
Well, it didn't hurt her that church for her happened in her home a lot too. So
that's true.
Our kids grew up with
that started even way back when we were at, I think when we were Akron. Yeah. But I think that the difference with that is
to the building.
Yeah, that's true too. Back in when Moses met with God on the mountain, God told him to take his shoes off. It was a holy ground. Yeah. So we have gotten it all kind of discombobulated in our head where we are meeting with God. There's a tent of meeting. The people came where God was. But then when Jesus came and said, you are God's temple now. You are, I'm in with my people. Now we are the temple of God. So we are the holy place. When, like you just said, when two or three are gathered, God is amongst us. He's in the midst of us. So we are the church. The problem with mixing up those terms means that we're going to get a little bit off here and there, aren't we? We're going to either hold in too high esteem this building we've put up with a steeple on it that represents God, or we're going to deflate the people of God just meeting around a campfire somewhere, singing some worship songs. We're going to think that's not quite as high up, or as. And it's funny because no matter whichever culture you grow up in, you might see one of those as more sacred than another. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you see them kind of joined. I think so
here's the thing, right? So if you were to think about community, then what are the things that deflate or destroy community? We've talked about a few things, barriers to community. One of them is like reducing it to something familiar, just something that makes you feel good. That's a barrier to true community, because true community, let's go all the way back to where we started this conversation, to the garden.
Adam and Eve.
Well, if we look at that, there's a definition of community there, right? Yeah. They're walking with God in the garden that's made for them. God gave them that they were sons and daughters. They're his creation. He gave them identity. He gave them who they are. He also told them what they were to do with their lives. They're to tend the garden. They're to manage the earth. So they were sons and daughters of God. that
Given
were
a job,
managing-
given a purpose.
Giving
yeah.
a purpose, and they were made to procreate and to populate the earth. So they were made to take care of this planet. Well, that was
Made-
so that was a go ahead.
Well, one of the points that we have here about marriage, made to walk beside each other, but definitely made out of the same cloth, as it were to speak, and yet two sides of it, right? So there's a whole bunch of, like you're saying, a bunch of communal
There's the
terms in
yeah,
there.
hierarchy as far as authority. God and man. God's the hierarchy, and we're under him. Us walking together for around purpose. And role is another thing entirely.
Sure.
Right now, our whole gender confusion thing is a lot of that's rooted in role more than it is anything else. It's not a biological question. It's a responsibility.
And identity, like you said, but feeling like someone's made me and I'm special the way I am, whether I look a certain way or feel a certain way or whatever. Yeah.
Sure. Anyway, to the garden. Rolling forward, so the community there was a community that had purpose. It was something it was supposed to do. It had relationship with each other and with God. And it had direction. So the purpose was to tend to manage the garden, but it was also to go out and to populate, to take over and to manage the world. So nowadays, we look at community, we should have that as our model, that we should be saying that we have our relationship with each other and with God. We should have what we're trying to do is to manage the world in which we've been placed. Could that be your small town? That be your city? That be
Your world, your family.
the world in which your family is in. Your area of influence, whatever God has entrusted you with.
Yeah.
That's your area of management, and you're to manage that in a way that is honoring to the garden and to the overall desire of what that should be. And then you have an end goal, and that's to propagate that, to continue to spread that goodness about. That's destiny. There's another word we can use there. Identity, your capacity to do so, how much of the management you're supposed to do, and then your destiny. What's beyond that, right? Are you with me?
And the idea of God sending them out, even if they wouldn't have had to leave the garden, they still would have been passing on what they knew, the relationship with Him, to their own children or to the generations that were to follow. That's what you're saying, right? Their influence wasn't supposed to stay just within those two, because God told them to be fruitful and multiply.
Those two started in the garden. If I were to guess, which is all it is, because it didn't work out this way, had there been no sin, had there been no relational break, because sin is the breaking of the relationship between man and God. That's all it is.
Yeah. Sad day.
Yeah, all the little things that you do are just byproducts of you not wanting to have a relationship with someone, or with God in that case. When you do things to harm a relationship, that's sin.
Yeah, or when you just turn away and do your own thing. Yeah,
that's exactly what Adam and Eve did. So my speculation is, as they multiplied, the garden, God created the heavens and the earth. He didn't create just a garden. He put a garden amongst it, and I think the garden would have expanded with the population. Instead, they sinned, and so God just cast them out of the garden, and they had to just make do with what was
because
out
the garden was to represent where they walked closely with God and a protected space, right?
Where heaven
so it was
touched
as
earth.
if, and as if they, it could have been eternal. The problem with the garden was that God said He did not want them to, in their state of rebellion, to eat from the tree of life, which would have given them eternity, right? So if they would have been able to stay in the garden without that, they would have been able to eat from the tree of life, because it would have been eternal. So what I'm saying is the garden represented the eternity that when God had to separate from that for their knowledge of good and evil and a rebellion, He had to send them out from that, right?
And the idea of what the fruit was that they ate that broke the whole thing, is missing the point of the story. Kind of like the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil and the fruit of the tree of life. It's not about a real fruit. It's about relationships at this point. They didn't.
Well, it's irrelevant whether
it's
it was
irrelevant.
a piece of an apple or
Because the point
something.
of the argument was, do you trust me or do you trust God? Do you trust yourself or do you trust God? That was what the serpent was trying to get them to do, was to take on their own responsibility.
Although they must have physically eaten something.
Well, yeah, it could have. Who knows? I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is, stop fighting over whether it's an apple or not, is all I'm trying to say. Because living in the garden in the presence of God, because God is life. So, being in the presence of the one who made you is life. That's what we experience now as believers.
Right.
We have
Which means
life
that
in
we've,
us.
in a sense, like I was saying, when Jesus told us we are the temple, we have come back into a garden type of relationship where eternity is ours now, because of Jesus. We have been handed the keys and death has been taken, so that we don't have to consider being separated or having that as a separation point, the knowledge of good and evil, which is very reassuring, but it means we can participate in eternity, right? So that's the difference now, is that we are back in an eternal relationship. So when they walked away from that was, or when they were told they had to, it was because death had entered into the scene, right, and had become the brokenness. So anyway, all I'm saying is that there's definitely a longing to go back there, longing to be back in that communal relationship with God and with each other.
That's where the writer of Ecclesiastes says that it's bound, or eternity is bound in the hearts of men. We understand we're designed for something longer. Rolling that back into the community conversation. So today's community, the community in any community, is supposed to have its identity in something in Christ, in God, and it's supposed to have its capacity to be an influence to manage the world, and as we've been created to do, and the destiny of doing that for as the inheritance of the kingdom forever. Now, what I'm saying by that is what broke community was relational distrust. Okay, they didn't trust God, then they didn't trust each other, and they were cast out. And to this day, we have relational distrust. What is the cause of wars and fights among you? Is it not the desire of your own heart, willing to kill other people to have it? I don't trust you. I want what I want. Okay, so when we go to churches,
and I don't trust that you're out for my good or for my
I don't
best
believe
interest.
that you want what I want.
Yeah,
and I don't believe that what you want will help me.
Yeah.
Or you have my best interest at heart. Exactly, and that's what's tough, because we still believe that about God, don't we? When we say, I followed Jesus and I believed in Jesus, but then he disappointed me. What? Are you saying that God doesn't have your best interest at heart, even though there was difficulty in your life because you live in a broken world?
Well, even what do we believe that he wants for us? Why don't we go to him first for everything rather than to the world and its ideas and the things around us, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, those are all about belief and trust, like you're saying.
Well, okay, so what are barriers to community? That's a barrier to community. We don't trust each other. We may want something familiar that feels good, but we want what we think it is, and we don't want it to have any meaning.
And how it looks like in our minds. That's what I was saying, by our own perspective.
Yeah.
This is what being nice to me looks like.
Yeah. We want the feeling without the work that gets the feeling there. And then when you go into some of these little environments that have had traditions forever, they do those things because it gives them at least a momentary sense of what is a good thing, a symbol of something good. That's why idols are frowned upon, because in the scripture, because this is idol doesn't bring you any comfort. To look at it may make you get a warm fuzzy. Idols today, we could look at, we watch TV shows that are particular styles because they make us feel good, but that's not our life. That's just the portrayal of a life. What makes you feel good is if you do the work to get that kind of experience in your own life, if that makes any sense.
Well, and so the other piece of a healthy community is reaching outside of itself. That was one thing that
community
we had talked about.
To actually take responsibility for one another and
for
the
a bigger picture, an unfamiliar picture. That's where we trust. Like if we're talking about a church group or a church family or a gathering of God's people, we trust that God has us so that we can give and reach out to others, even ones who don't know him, right? The idea of forgive because you've been forgiven, or give because you've been given to. Those kinds of things, it feels that's easy among people who are familiar with doing that all their lives, maybe to this 2 or 3 people or families around them that they can kind of, quote, trust. It's harder when it comes to, like in these situations where people are moving from all over the United States, trying to take advantage of the Tennessee atmosphere or the freedom, the politics, whatever. It's going to be harder for them to think, I have to give of myself to this situation or this people that I don't know, that I'm not familiar with, that I don't trust, and to think outside of what I've always known. That gets scary, and it's definitely where we are challenged to who are we trusting? Mm-hmm. If God is the author of our salvation, he's also the creator of this one next to me who's seeking God as well. Can't I trust him that both of our needs can be met, not just mine the way I've always thought it should be, right? But this person's also, and my world needs to open up and be willing to receive that in.
So the barriers
Unfamiliar.
are selfishness, self-centeredness, wanting something familiar without having the work of actually putting others before yourself, really, and thinking about the community. Because even that person coming in from the foreign place they're asking the question, what are things that make me feel at home? Rather than saying, hey, I've come into this place, how can I become a part of their home? And the people that are already here are going, why are these people defiling our home with something we don't understand? Rather than
new
everyone
ideas.
should be asking the question. I'm thinking what's crossing my mind as you're talking about it is the curse of Babylon is still in effect. Where people were in the biblical thing, they were scattered amongst the worlds because they spoke different languages. Well, in America, most of us speak English anyway, but we don't speak the same culture.
Oh, you mean the Tower of Babel?
The Tower of Babel. What did I say? I said,
No, you're right.
yeah.
Tower
Tower
of
of Babel,
Babylon.
not Babylon. So, but anyway, we still have Babylon problems or Babel problems.
That we speak different
We
languages.
speak different languages, even though we're using the same words. We speak the same words.
But we don't. Just like we talked about in marriage, we don't. We think we do. And we think we have more in common than we really do.
That's the deception, yeah.
Yeah.
We speak familiar terms to one another, but it's what's familiar to you.
Right.
Same word might not mean the same thing.
Exactly.
Literally, we have
the
to...
familiar songs I'm used to may not be the exact same as the definition of familiar to you.
Yeah. The familiar church to you may not be the same church as I experienced. One of the things that's interesting is the little church we're going to now comes from a different tradition that we grew up in.
Yeah.
And while they're a community-based church right now, their tradition is not what I grew up with. So it's been an awkward adjustment for me to find a rhythm to worship within that environment. And I'm getting there, but it's taken some time. And I'm like, I still want to fix it.
Right.
I want it to be like I'm familiar with.
Telling my mom this morning, but I relate more to the older hymn book that they have. They have 2 different hymn books, and I realized that a lot more of the older traditions probably were closer knit back, say, early 1900s or before that, even 1850s, maybe somewhere, where the churches were closer in, from the original ones that came from England or whatever it might be, the original faiths. And so much of the denominationalism split us off. And so that within the last 50 years, we've gotten even further from each other, So these hymn books that have been done in the last 50 years or so are a lot different. They're showing the ways of how the traditions have angled off. So that's interesting. Yeah. But it also makes us think it's been exciting in some ways because we see a lot more in common than we thought we had with some other denominations through this experience. But there are still a lot of divides that our culture has handed us. This is what's going on just in political places as well right now. Our culture hands us a dividing. It's almost like they say, now put up this wall because you're divided in this. We don't have to be, but we are because our culture has talked us into it. So I think that's an interesting angle that we're learning.
The culture reframes the conversation, and they try to redefine familiar words for us.
Yeah, exactly. But we're finding people that love Jesus still just love Jesus, and they want his work in the world. That's
and
we'll see.
They'll define those words in the way that is most comfortable for us to have those definitions. Does that make sense? Well, if you go to the place and you feel, I'm going to get into the church thing. And I go here and I want to go where I feel the Spirit of God.
Oh yeah, so you'll use a term
that's incredibly subjective.
Yeah.
And it's not objective
especially
at all.
when it's about feelings versus.
And I want to be real clear. I want to feel the Spirit of God too. I'm down with that. I'm all about feeling the Spirit of God. Nothing better. But I don't go to church to feel the Spirit of God. That's a byproduct of something more important. When Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes up." So I go to church to find the truth.
And we were saying, why did
that the Spirit affirms that, and I experience
right?
that.
And we were saying, what is the purpose or the point of it is exactly that, is to remind us of what Jesus said. That's the Holy Spirit told us, or that's what Jesus said the Holy Spirit would do, would remind us of what truth is and bring us. So when we go to church on Sundays, we're celebrating what Jesus has done. We're reminding the truth, we're being reminded of the truth and celebrating that and worshiping. It isn't necessarily going to be always a comfort zone. It's reminding of the truth. Sometimes we've been way off that week in what the truth actually is, or we've encountered the truth in other places that we were afraid of.
Missed it.
Or,
Yeah.
So I think those are good perspectives for us to remember when we're looking for a community of believers. It's not only about our comfort zones, and in reality, maybe it should be right the opposite. Our comfort zones may be dangerous.
You should find comfort in the midst of difficulty.
Because his peace brings us comfort.
Yeah, you're broken. All of us are broken. Human beings by nature. I haven't met a perfect one yet, except for one. And, that was Jesus. And meeting in the sense of, I haven't reached out, shook the hand on planet Earth. But we need to understand that the barrier to community is a desire to define our community based upon what we want it to be, because it doesn't cause us any difficulty or discomfort. We're all looking to be comforted. And the reality is that you can't find true comfort unless you're in a community that challenges you. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And one of the things that I've always learned about swordplay is whenever there's iron coming against one another, sparks tend to fly.
Yeah. Well, when the Bible says we're only to be giving away what we've been comforted by, which is his presence. Mm-hmm. So that means we're not really supposed to find comfort in each other. We're supposed to give away the comfort we've received from him. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot to be said about what we have put as that defining that comfort, right? Yeah. It's him that should bring us comfort. So I just think we sometimes misunderstand what his comfort will bring us. Most of the time, it's going to bring us his consolation that he's with us. He'll walk through it with us. And then we are to give that comfort, that same comfort of his presence, to someone else. That person may not necessarily be our comfort, and they shouldn't be. They will bring some comfort to us, right?
Yeah.
And that will be from his presence. And,
I guess with that, I'm going to turn that up really loud. With that, I'm going to turn on some exit music here. Just since everything that we've done today has had some strange interruptions now and again, from things falling off the wall to, I don't know about you, but I keep hearing the ice maker in the background going, and I'm going, man, that thing makes ice fast. But anyway, to phone calls and other things. And I kicked you at least once or twice under the table. I want to say this.
It's been an exciting adventure.
It has been an adventure of just trying to have a conversation, which means that I believe that something good was said. Because for all of the crap that we're going through, something good had been said. I'm going to hold on to that. We have, I don't know how to put it. We are not looking in community. I know what it was. Hang on. I got to get the words around it. This is also what happens with lots of interruptions. Interruptions are designed to destroy your thought train. There is all of this iron sharpening iron. We talked about you and I sometimes having some sparks fly. We're better people today because we fought it out. We're better people today because life hasn't always been easy or comfortable. Now, the ease of life, I don't think there's anything in Scripture that said, even in the garden, Adam and Eve worked the garden. The Bible doesn't say that Adam and Eve wouldn't work. The Bible says that the ground would become difficult for them. And it becomes difficult, that it would toil and it would seem fruitless. And that's the struggle that we deal with in this world, is it seems like we're doing this work and there's no end to it. But here's the thing. Faith in God means believing that when you're doing the work, even though it doesn't feel fruitful, God is faithful.
That's right.
And that's the work that in our own marriage and our own struggles at times, even though at times it didn't feel fruitful, God's been faithful to us.
That's right, he has. The Bible says their character is about endurance. And so we praise him for endurance no matter what, that no matter in the meantime, there's challenges. But he gets us through. That's right, because he's faithful.
All right, with that being said, we can return calls, put things back on the walls, see if the ice maker still works, all the things that we need to do, and we'll wrap this up because that's what's happening in our community here in this episode of
Ask Mom
and Dad. We're thankful so much for listening, and hopefully we'll hear from you. Hopefully you'll hear from us again soon. Take care. Bye-bye now.